Welcome to the 2024 Traveller Mayday event. I'm your host, Frank Sucardi from CyborgPrime Games. My guest today is Geir Lanesskog. Introduce yourself. Who are you and what do you do?
I am Geir Lanesskog, and I've worked in the computer industry for about 30 years, but hopefully going to retire from that soon. But I've been probably playing Traveller since, I think, 1979. Saw it was a review of Mercenary in the Space Gamer, because I started with the metagaming stuff because it was cheap and I could afford it on my allowance. And I was like, hey, science fiction, that's more fun. I guess I better buy a little box and figure it out. And fortunately, the kid who lived across the street from me was also interested, and we got one little campaign going way back in before 1980 anyway. And then I've just started playing and collecting, and somewhere along the way I started making subsectors on my Commodore 64, and from that I started to program more and more stuff. The Scout book came out in '83, and I was taking an astronomy class in college at the time, and I was just like, hey, wait a second, I can do better than that. And so that eventually, over the course of years and various versions of BASIC, evolved into a 10,000 line program that probably got me my first job out of college. So you could say that Traveller got me into computers, and computers got me 30 years of pay. So I'll teach my parents just to not complain about me playing my little games and my dice in my room.
Yes, so thank you, Traveller, for your livelihood. When did you first get into RPGs? How did you find out about them?
Well, it was like I said, I had an allowance of about $5, and I could buy stuff at the hobby store from metagaming, and so I got Melee and Wizard and Ogre back in the day, and I guess it's all Steve Jackson's fault then, because I eventually subscribed to the Space Gamer, and like I said, that's where I saw hadn't actually seen Traveller directly, but the Mercenary Book 4, it's like, oh, I'm already 3 books behind, was what gave me the hint that I should look into this. And quite frankly, I've always liked the character generation system, even if it killed you. It was better to me than the D&D stuff I'd played, where a first level, I'm a wizard, I can knock you over with one little magic fist, and then I'm out for the rest of the day, that sort of thing. And then I'm 14th level, and here's a sea of orcs, and I'm just going to wade through them with my sword. Traveller's mechanics, where it was more realistic as far as what a character could do, and it didn't really matter the first day whether you were first level or 15th level. You were a guy who had a career, and now you're stuck in this thing. And it's even worse now because they tend to scale the adventures to the level of expertise of the adventurers, which that's just not how things work. But
well, how would you manage that kind of thing with Traveller? A lot of GMs may find it like hard to, without like a leveling system to like figure out how many bad guys to have in their adventure or whatever. What's your suggestions for that?
There can be as many bad guys as you want, just don't do stupid things, right? That's one thing that you learn in Traveller right away, is that combat is always dangerous, and it's always smarter to think before you shoot, have a plan. And combat it's not like experience points, right? It's not kill the monster, take the gold. It's you're actually looking to achieve your objective, and if you don't have to hurt anybody in the process, even if you're robbing a bank or whatever you're doing, even if you're a mercenary, the goal is always the goal. It's not how many points can I rack up by shooting things. So you can scale it to the size of the party, right? If there's 10 to 20 thugs, but that's really not what the emphasis in the game is, at least not according to me. I would think it's more role playing, and the older I've gotten, the more it is role playing, and occasionally just roll 2 dice and see if that looks good enough without having to check a whole bunch of rules.
Sure.
It's to keep the game going.
So you would say your games are dice light?
Yeah.
Are you primarily the GM or the player in your games?
I have been both, but I've mostly been the player, honestly. And then a bunch of solo stuff. During the kind of the dead zone of Traveller, when GW collapsed, actually even the new era, I was too busy to really play in any campaigns, and I just became more a collector and occasionally solo player. And then that died off entirely in the late 90s. Didn't even catch on to GURPS until I saw the GURPS version 4 Interstellar Wars book, which I thought was really cool. And that's when I started looking at it again after a decade of silence. But unfortunately, the last few years, it's been solo play and then writing, which kind of came out of that solo play. The Deep Night Revelation series starts with you in the Imperium, and then you have to go towards the border. Well, I got to the Beyond, and then I said, what the hell is this? I have the Paranoia Games original sectors for the Beyond and Vanguard Reaches, and they just don't work. So I had already been kind of, I wouldn't say a thorn in Mongoose's side for several years, but I had been basically providing my editorial comments free of charge for the typical errata and other stuff.
Do you mean
probably?
Do you mean you were trolling them online, or were you actually like giving them like real suggestions?
I was mostly I was sending Matthew direct emails on, hey, this is page 14, you got that wrong. Page 16, you got that wrong. Oh, and by the way, all these planets are not what they're supposed to be in the Spinward marches. And well, they sent me a new map. So I mean, I never really asked for anything from them, but I had sort of built up at least a reputation of providing useful input,
being a helper.
Yeah, and then the pandemic came along about the same time as this solo revelation thing ran into the Beyond, and I just decided that I wanted to redo the sectors. I'd been playing with that for a while, making my own sectors, and pieced together, and then started putting out on their forum the subsector by subsector, and I got about 3 or 4 of those, and then talked to some other people, and then decided I would approach Matthew about it, and he said, yeah, sure, go ahead, do the book. You need to do 2 sectors, so you got to do Vanguard Reaches too. And that one was a bigger mess. I mean, there's a whole subsector of SS worlds in the literally SS division. So it was a whole subsector from Paranoia Press, so that needed to be gutted. That and Buxom World, is that what we're going to call that? So I mean, there was a lot of stuff that just had to go.
That was at the Planet of the Amazon Women.
I don't know.
Yeah.
There was a Thieves World too, which probably was just stolen straight from Thieves
Robert
World.
Aspirin,
Stuck in there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly, and just dropped in there. So that might have been good enough for 1980, but it certainly wasn't good enough for 2020. And the pandemic came along, and suddenly 2 hours of commute vanished on me because I got to work from home, and so I actually had time to write. Blame that on being frustrated with Paranoia Press stuff, and a pandemic is really why I started writing for Mongoose.
All right. Did you like put something together and then like pitch it to Matt, or was it just this like back and forth thing that kind of just naturally evolved into one day you like realized your name is in the like credits?
Well, like I said, I'd done a couple of the subsectors, and I was kind of having to do the maps on some blog site, free blog site, and linking it back. And after I'd done 4 or 5 of those, and I was kind of having a side conversation with Joshua Bell, because I was using Traveller map stuff to build those maps.
Mm-hmm.
And so I provided some hopefully useful feedback on some of his stuff too. And I just asked him, hey, should I just pitch this or what? He said, sure, why not? And I kind of did.
Uh-huh.
And Matthew was fine with me just continuing with what I was doing, essentially, except he wanted 2 sectors for a sector book. And I gave him so much material that a lot of it actually had to be cut, because it was pushing 350 pages, I think.
Wow.
By the time I was done. Well, I did Subsector, and I wanted to do 4 or 5 planets in detail, sort of like they do. And then I had the various polities, the different states, and then for each of them I had a couple of ships. And by the time you add all that up, and then patron encounters too, because that's what I was throwing in on my own stuff on the side. So all that, some of it became JTAS articles, some of it's still sitting on the cutting room floor somewhere. But that's why that book costs more than the rest, because it's still bigger binding. And then after that, which one did I do after? Yeah, I think after that it was the Subsector construction guide, which didn't turn out the way I wanted it to, because I didn't realize I wanted it to be like a real construction kit with stencils and colored pens and stuff that you could actually, use in addition to the rules and the blank sector sheets.
You mean
But
like make cutout templates and stuff, or?
oh yeah, well,
Mhm.
just, or at least color within the lines, because I'm not great at that.
Okay.
Put the world circle in, put the star for the naval base and stuff without just freehanding it.
Gotcha.
But they're a publishing house, not a gaming house, and
Right.
so it came out as a box set, with a sample for even sector, and basically rules that I had developed on my own as I was doing, not those 2 sectors. What are they called now? Catch me.
Uh,
The ones down below right there. Hey, I have this thing up. Let me look. Um, yeah, Filani and Astron. I'd sort of developed a plan for how to do those, so I kind of incorporated some of the frontier drifting things. How many years has it been settled? So what's the population modifier and stuff like that? And some of the things I'd done for creating alien races, and kind of that's all in that Subsector guide thing. It's not a bad book, but it just wasn't really what I was expecting it to turn out to be. But
what
at
would
least,
you with the limitations that you have with not being able to put in markers and things like that, like in the format that it had to be, what would you change about it like a second edition? Like what's the biggest rub for you as the author?
I don't know. I think it covers a certain category of creating stuff that's more than just the Subsector at a time. Um, I would like to make something that's more like the T4 or TNE that did the Pocket Empires. I think that is something a little bit more detailed, and then with like the evolution year by year of colonization, things like that you could do, make it a mini game. That's what I would kind of aim for as a Pocket Empires sort of thing. In addition to this, the static created as a certain time frame, right? Because then it's sort of the same problem I have with some of the planetary generation stuff. Is you're taking a snapshot of the present, and that's fine, but you can't really make a game out of it, and you can't move it forward and backwards. And Pocket Empires, at least you could do that. I don't know if anybody actually did that. I mean, that's what the book gives you directions to do, but even I just looked at it and said, "Hey, this is cool," and then put it on a shelf. Like, I think all of my T4 stuff is on a shelf. That was the last stuff I bought from a hobby store when there still were hobby stores.
Mm-hmm. So, what in the sector construction guide? How does that? Well, I was going to say, how does that differ from the world construction guide? Obviously, the world construction guide is for worlds, and the sectors for sectors. But sector must cover some world stuff, right?
Yeah, it does, but it doesn't get into anything more than the main world.
Okay.
It doesn't deal with the Builder's Handbook. Is sort of, I don't know if it's my reward for providing other stuff. That was one where it was, what do you want to do next? And I said, this is what I really want to do. Don't know if it's going to sell. Honestly, don't really care, but this is how I got into programming and into Traveller, at a deeper level, was the original World Builder's Handbook from Digest Group, and my reaction to the Scouts book saying that, hey, I just learned this in the astronomy class, and it's not quite going to fit that way. My own program, though, broke in 1995 when they started inventing or discovering real worlds, and my invented systems all didn't look like that. And yeah, I never did rewrite it as a computer program, mainly because at this point I haven't done any serious programming in a couple of decades. So it's all spreadsheets to test the stuff now, but at least I was able to incorporate, what's been found out in the past 20, 30 years about how exoplanets really look. So I
That's
could
what I
build
was going to
systems.
ask, is if you
Yeah.
if you did research into, if you would want to say like update what we know of our knowledge of exoplanets. I know that like if you're using the UWP, I mean, you only have so much granularity of, how far you can go, but with the digits. But how did you manage to like organize and classify things into those bands?
Well, you had those extended ones, the PGP, the population gas giant belts, or the other way around. Can't remember. But so at least you had a quantity for how many gas giants and how many planetoid belts, other than the main world, if it was an asteroid belt, you have in a system. So I kept all of that. I looked through T5 for what was there. Took the orbits system that they had and kind of fractionalized it, which was already sort of a thing, and just tried to fit what we knew to be true within the boundaries of what was going to work from or what could be just presented on Traveller map, and what was consistent with T5, which it's a very thorough treatment of things, but it's very sometimes difficult to find what you're looking for.
Mm-hmm.
So try to make it as compatible as possible. I did ignore a lot of the large world, rad world, and storm world sort of things that don't have any real meaning, and extended the size of worlds up to super Earth. So the size, instead of stopping at 12 or C, it goes to F, which is about where the cutoff of super Earths and mini Neptunes is anyway. So it, the there isn't that much you really have to do for the planets, other than dealing with the weird atmospheres you're going to get outside the habitable zone. And I just kind of gave basic guidance. It's A, B, or C, and then here's some gas mixtures, and when they become gaseous and when they become liquid, and put some tables in there to do some random stuff with it based on temperature. But for the most part, it's there more as a tool set for the referee to build a world if they want to. That's just weird. I did check it all out with my giant spreadsheet of doom to do a whole sector, but there's a lot of detail in there. I don't expect anybody to even build whole systems unless they really, really want to. It's more to provide depth where you need it, or depth where you want it for a certain adventure. But that one was the most fun.
It's a gold bestseller over on Drive-Thru. So congrats on that. 256 pages. Not too shabby. That's pretty beefy.
Mm-hmm. That one was fun. Robots too was. I think that's the bestseller. Is been Robots, and that was fun too, because I started looking at how, I wouldn't say lame, but robots weren't really explained in Mongoose Traveller. I mean, they just were kind of things that were out there. So what I was told to do was I could make my generation system, but I had to make all, I think, 45 published robots fit within it. And so that was fun. The slots and the spaces, kind of concept slots for battle dress and spaces for vehicles, it's not what Striker used to be, right? It's not the detailed automobile suspension and what sort of engine you have and all that stuff. It's a higher level of abstraction, but it's consistent with the vehicle book and consistent with the way suits were being designed. So within there, there's enough room to work with where I could kind of build a system that also, spreadsheets again, would work to build consistent machines. And once I got all of the 40-ish ones that existed, at least more or less correct, although the prices were all over the place, so the prices got redone. But then it was easy to build out from there something that could build a lot of robots, and I did. So that was all, and I'm still being called upon every once in a while for someone, hey, can you build me a robot that does this? It's like, okay, yeah, that's easy. I know what I'm doing there.
Well, one of the things the Robot Handbook boasts about is you can build any robot from any setting. So, how did you aside from like the robot? No, they meant outside of like the Traveller settings, right? I mean, so you had to do all the 45 published robots plus like any robot you could think of, like the Robinson robot and the Dr. Theopolis and Tweaky robot, and how did you go about like identifying and finding and figuring out like every kind of robot?
Well,
Like from pop
that
culture
might be a slight
mostly, or
exaggeration. Yeah,
okay,
well, that and just you build the basics and then you can figure out what you can do with it. There's I think 110 robots in that book, and then and not all of them are strictly Traveller-ish. They're consistent with the Traveller rules. So you've got G thrusters for some of them, and but you don't have to use that. You can build that. You can build a Mars rover. In fact, I did. I built the Curiosity rovers essentially with the rules. So it's flexible enough to handle real world stuff. What it doesn't do directly is handle things bigger than about 2 displacement tons in Traveller terms. But I do have brains for ships and brains for vehicles to kind of bridge that gap.
so you
Um,
could build an ogre.
You could build an ogre, yeah. You build it in the vehicle system, and then you stick a robot brain in it. So that's the main limitation is size there. But I did go down to the nano robot size, and there's really not a lot of stuff in Traveller about nano robots or even micro robots. I think there's something from Pirates with World of Newman. Newman, yeah, that had like. Basically nano machines warring against each other on that planet. But other than that, it's not really covered in Traveller and really hasn't been at all, as far as I can
What
recall.
kind of nanobots and microbots did you build?
There's the standard ones, and this actually also fits into quote unquote pre-existing because there was like knights on Newman that had enhancements and priests that had enhancements to strength and dexterity and intelligence based on nanobots. But I did some anti-aging nanobots. I did construction nanobots. That's the main thing is either it helps you with an attribute or it builds something.
Mm.
Fabricators was another thing that I threw in there.
Medical?
Well, yeah, you can do you can build, you can do bio robots. You can do auto docks. I literally made the auto docks out of the rules as well. Standard one and the fancy one and a fancier one, a flying one. So you can grow tissues. I think it's tech level 17 before you can really kind of grow a living thing with a living brain. But they'll just wander out and ish or not, depending on what you're building.
Right, right.
But I tried to extend it all the way out to the higher tech levels. And mentioned, I think gray goo is tech level 22 or 23 when the whole planet can turn into basically nano food for the nano robots.
A deconstructed thing.
Yeah. So I mean, I think it covers a fairly wide range of stuff. How much of it is directly applicable is up to the referee, right? You don't necessarily throw it all into the Third Imperium universe into charted space. It just depends. Fabrication really was never really a thing, but I think that's a legacy of the 70s because it wasn't a thing in the 70s. But you can say that the workshop on a scout ship has a fabricator and you can build parts with it. And
Sure.
I kind of did some sizing stuff to say how big it would have to be to fit in there, how big of a thing it can make, how long it takes to make stuff.
Do you have like biofabricators or just
Yeah,
synthetic
both.
fabricators?
There's a biofabricator thing in there too. Generally higher tech level. It starts with just plain tissue and then becomes more complicated, obviously, as the tech levels go up. So that's part of the AutoDock feature too, is you can regenerate a limb.
Very cool. That's a platinum bestseller over on Mongoose, so congratulations on that, and also a beefy 264 pages.
Yeah, and that one was a lot of fun too. I did this updated central supply catalog, mostly because I was asked to, but that was fun too, to kind of go back and fix some of the stuff there. I added the fabricator section consistent with the robot handbook to that, and try to incorporate some of the various things from their supplements. I tried to build a system to design suits, vac suits and battle dress and stuff, but I could never get it to work very well. So at some point, suits probably have to be looked at, because
Uh-huh.
there was no consistency in pricing and capability that I could find that I could make work in robots. That was easier because I could change the rules to make it work in a spreadsheet.
Right.
Right. If something was complicated or just kind of squirrely or it didn't make sense, I would just change the rules to make it make sense.
Sure.
It's harder to do that when the things already exist.
Yeah, how do you handle that? I
And
mean, you're gonna when you tinker with that stuff, do you get like any kind of backlash from the community? I mean,
uh,
people love what they love,
Russ-
and folks love lore, and if you mess with it, some people have something to say
yeah,
about it.
yeah, less than I would have expected. And I try to stay out of. Right now, there seems to be on the forums kind of a whole thing going on about thrusters and mass and stuff, and I probably have my own opinions on there. I'm just going to keep my mouth shut,
Hmm.
because it hasn't been directed back at me though, so I'll just keep
Sure.
my mouth shut.
I'm down with hand
I try to
waving
be
them
reasonable.
myself. It's like it doesn't matter how the anti-gravity works or how the thrusters work. It just does. Nobody in Star Trek or Star Wars ever talk about that.
Yeah,
You know.
yeah. I mean, it's true that the anti gravity thing doesn't turn out to be, if you do it right, perpetual motion machine, but you could argue that hydropower is perpetual motion machine. You're stealing the energy, gravitational energy, right?
Hmm.
So I'm assuming, and that's why I like that limitation that kind of snuck in on the M drive, that you have to have some sort of gravity field. Then I can justify it as you're stealing energy from the planet or whatever generated the field in the first place.
Mm.
And that's how the planetary flybys, where they increase speeds with the slingshot, works. Is you're stealing energy from the planet. When you do
Hmm.
that, planet's really big; it doesn't notice. Um, but that kind of brings me to another thing that I've working on, or actually have worked on. It's sort of sitting in the background right now, and that's another entire environment, Pioneer, um, which is basically Traveller in the 21st century with like real science.
Oh yeah, Matt
Um,
was talking about that last year.
yeah, he had a guy, a PhD with this, at least some NASA experience, who I haven't directly talked to, and hopefully isn't listening to this and making faces at me. Um, did a pretty good job of it, but it wasn't really Traveller. Um, so I Travelerized it, and then I did something that also kind of derived from me learning something real worldish from Traveller. So let me step back a few steps. When T&E came out, the new era, one of the things they did was they kind of took away the maneuver drive for the most part, and they gave you this Heplar thing that was high performance plasma drive. So you had G hours to work with instead of being able to go constantly from place to place. You had a limited fuel supply, and from that, for some reason, I decided, hey, let's see if I can design something with these rules that kind of looks like a tech level 7 or 8, like a modern rocket. And then I started to do some, I would say amateur rocket science research, and realized that it wasn't going to work with those rules. But it taught me enough in the background to learn how to at least make spreadsheet models of real rockets. Nothing that would ever probably ever be built, but it would be within the realm of possibility. Um, and when I kind of got the assignment to to play with Pioneer, I went back and I used some of the things that I had learned over the past 20 years on that, and as it stands right now, all of the rockets and spacecraft and modules and everything that will be in Pioneer is stuff that is at least it's built on a background of real math, real rocket science, and there's no design rules directly in the book, at least to start with, but it's all based and consistent. So if they do like a iGuard version of Pioneer, the rules would all be there and should work properly with all the stuff that I threw out there.
What are the main features of Pioneer? It's kind of like it's low tech exploration and colonization game.
It is. It's what was it Matt just said to me this week? It is. If you've seen why do I blank on names? Sorry, I have to edit that. If you've seen For All Mankind and looked at the second and third season of that, second season's mostly set on the moon. Third season is basically a race to Mars. That's about what we're looking at. So we're looking at 10, 20 years out. In fact, the first supplement, which I'm also kind of volunteered to write, was the basically Race to Mars book, where the player characters are among a group racing to be first on Mars, which is a lot of what that third season of For All Mankind was about. So it's kind of frustrating to a certain degree where we stand today, because SpaceX is right apparently on the edge of making everything different than it's been. And after the third test flight was more or less more successful anyway, it's going to change the paradigm of how it all works. And so it's difficult. Honestly, it's more difficult to write about the near future than the far future, because it's easy to be wrong, right?
Right.
By the time the thing gets published, you could already be, oops, that. So I have in the background designed a couple of SpaceX-like launch systems, but we're not using real names, at least at the present. So it's all fake companies and things that are not that heavily disguised from SpaceX, honestly, because that's what they're doing. Building a heavy lift, 2-stage, fully reusable rocket that puts a bunch of stuff into space. That's supposed to eventually go to Mars. And it turns out to only be a couple of ways to do that. And one of them involves nuclear propulsion, which isn't going to happen in the atmosphere anytime soon. So it's pretty much only one way to do it. So if SpaceX collapses on itself, then doesn't turn out to look that way. If somebody comes up with something we haven't thought of, or a space elevator or something, then it's going to be wrong. And it's I saw an interview or heard an interview with Mark Miller saying that he said a lot of the stuff like about what used to be tech level 8 stuff, anti-gravity and faster than light travel, to a time period where he'd be dead. And so it didn't really matter if he was wrong. Problem with Pioneer is I hope I'm not dead in 10 or 20 years, but it's definitely a risk that what we guess today is going to be not what it looks like. And so what's the shelf life of the game? That's the sort of thing that bothers me in the background. I'm not.
I wish players, and I hope this for you, that people have more grace for that kind of stuff, because plenty of people play D&D, and although it's a medieval setting, it's never happened or occurred. And same thing with Star Trek, same thing with some other things like I don't know, travel. There's a time travel show called Travelers that happens nowadays. I mean, it's science fiction, so people should give it some leeway and not be like, oh, that guy who speculated was wrong, see, he's a phony or something. I mean, it's like, come on. It's a game, and it's an alternate universe, and just take it for what it is. If it doesn't match up with the real world. How could it?
Well,
You know?
I'm looking at a model of a Space 1999 Eagle right now, and
Mm-hmm.
sitting on my desk. And obviously, that didn't happen
Right.
quarter century ago, did it?
No,
So
no. We still don't have cutters, like that modular cutters in
no,
regular use or whatever on a moon base. We don't even have a moon base.
nope,
Or
we
forget
don't.
about blowing the moon out of orbit.
Well,
We have to put a base there first.
even as a 10-year-old, I knew that didn't make a lot of sense, but it was still a really cool show at the time.
I was
Well, they had
wondering.
really cool rocket ships.
Yeah. The rocket ships were what inspired my imagination, and just this, I love any kind of sci-fi thing, even stuff I don't like. I still like it. But yeah, the old classic UFO and all those Space 1999, The Prisoner. Not exactly sci-fi, more spy-fi or whatever, but all good classic stuff
Yeah, and
that
I don't think
never
they can
that
do
never
it.
materialized.
Yeah, and the Space 2000, well, the 2001: A Space Odyssey,
Mm-hmm.
same thing there. We're not heading to Jupiter 20 years ago. We're not
Right.
heading to Jupiter probably not even 20 years from now. But
Right. Nor do we have
maybe,
a tourist space station in orbit.
yeah. But the thing is, we may only be 20 years away from some of that stuff, and I think, or 5 years away from at least a small little thing. I I, I think it. I can't be too wrong unless the laws of physics break on us, and maybe there really is an air raft in our future. But that would be nice. But I don't think that's going to happen.
0-point engine.
Fly something. Energy for free. Then thermodynamics. We can get into giant arguments with people about thermodynamics. I wrote a couple of self-published books that were kind of based on real rocket science as well, but more advanced. But even then, talking a tenth of a G, and your spaceship essentially glows in the dark from the radiated heat. So yeah.
So how do you reconcile these things, or do you just get it close enough and just worry about people are going to be pedantic anyway? So
Oh, I can get that way too. So yeah,
mm-hmm.
I just try to keep it with, for the most part, there is nuclear thermal. I think, yeah, one of the things is a nuclear thermal engine line of things. Ion engines, they're so low thrust that it's kind of pointless. But um, I didn't do anything that couldn't necessarily be built today as far as materials go. No fusion drive. I had in the document that's sitting out on Mongoose's forum for the beta testers, I had a neutrino detector in there, and I got slammed on that pretty quickly and had to pull it because real neutrino detectors are, these giant water-filled things that would
Yeah,
never fit on a spaceship.
yeah,
So yeah, it's like, all right, I'll pull that out. That's
yeah.
not
They're giant
reasonable.
underground tanks filled with sensors,
Mhm.
right?
Right. And so maybe in 300 years they'd fit on a starship, but right now don't fit in a stadium. So that one I backed off on because there was no real scientific way to do that. But I think everything else is stuff that can be built.
So what's the
Um,
goal of the game? Like to just reach Mars and build a habitat there,
Well,
or is it
it's to be the people on the frontier. It's to be either you're building or exploring the moon base, or asteroid mining, or going to Mars. There is, at least we originally had some stuff about a kind of a second generation thing where there's more space stuff established, but at least for this first iteration, it's all near future. Um, One of the things that I'm also suspecting people might be a little bit annoyed at is it's got, a traveler generation for characters, but there's no money. There is literally no money in the game, because if you're on these missions or you're doing this stuff, it's not a matter of, you're not going to go out and spend your credits to buy, these tools. You're going to be issued the tools for the mission. It's going to be part of the build of the vehicle that you're in. Uh, and that kind of fits because, and even if you're a space tourist, you're going to be limited to here's your 350 grams of personal belongings you can take on your Soyuz capsule, and that's it. It's not and I don't expect things to be as primitive as the Soyuz capsule, but still, the mass limits getting to orbit are going to be a real thing, and the tools that you'll be issued are things that most people will never be able to afford. So there's no money. Your benefits all come out as either contacts or allies or improvements to characteristics, and that's it. Good news is you'll never go broke. Bad news is that, yeah, your rewards are mission accomplished more than they are. Here's your pilot credits.
So like the missions are mostly like sponsored by, corporations or polities, and you don't have to worry about what they cost because they're sponsored, or.
Yeah, you're a crew, or you're there for a reason. You still has all the things like, you could be a reporter, you could be a tourist, you could be a scientist, and that's really for the Mars one, which hasn't been written yet. I would think that the one that the player characters would be concerned with would be a private effort, because that's more likely to have a diverse crew, um, and you'll probably be competing against. Governments and some more rigid corporations, as opposed to kind of an open thing. So at least that's my first idea, and then I wanted to just kind of let people play with this thing for real orbits called the pork chop plot, which tells you how much, when you can launch and when you get there, and how much energy that takes. I don't think that's going to let me put that in the game, but it's sort of how you decide. Here's the things you have to work with. Here's your payload. If you take less payload, or you launch earlier or later, you might be able to get there first, and that might be too much math. He doesn't want too much math in it, and I made the modules and things for vehicles and stations more Lego block than they probably should be, but standardized modules and Lego blocks. You don't want to limit the game to people that actually want to do math.
Right. Yeah, you're trying to find a balance of crunchiness.
Right. So
Okay.
it's crunchy light. It's crunchy on the surface, but
Soft in the middle.
well, hopefully somebody's done. My goal is to have done the math for you, so that you can take the pieces, the constructed pieces, and put them together and build a mission, without having to worry about exactly how much power you have to allocate, or how large your engines are. I didn't get into details like, there's all sorts of subtleties in in chemical engines about how you get performance and stuff, and I just basically said that if you want more performance, the engine costs more. I'm not going to worry about whether it's closed cycle or open cycle or all these other things that I barely understand anyway.
Right. Well, that makes sense. That's a good way to abstract it. It doesn't matter. It just is more expensive.
Yeah, you want 10% more performance, you just double your price. Congratulations.
Cool.
And again, that's more going to be, again, somebody else is paying for it, but you might, as the mission team, you have choices about what you can bring, and how much risk you're willing to accept.
Right. Hey, did we talk about Spinward Extents?
Well, that was the Spinward Extents is that is the Beyond and Vanguard Reaches. So that's
Right.
that first one.
Okay.
So yeah, I got to I took,
because that one's also Electrum bestseller. So
yeah, that one's was like I said, I mainly got annoyed because there weren't enough gas giants in the Beyond to refuel. And the more you looked at it, the worse it looked. All of it,
right.
especially Vanguard Reaches. But I took other stuff that had been either deprecated, decanonized, or had been done on the wiki, and used that as inspiration to kind of weave something that made sense to me. And somewhere back there when I was in school, I got a history degree. So, I mean, I have some idea of how to set up a background history and states that make sense. And in the meantime, the whole Drynaxian thing that was built for the Pirates of Drynax, there's that ancient empire that sort of splintered and died 3,000 years ago. So I could use that or exiles from that to make little nuggets of some of the states out there to explain why there were humans out there that had built bigger states earlier than the last couple of hundred years. So I mean, I just kind of took pieces that existed either officially or not officially and tried to weave it into a narrative that made sense for the areas.
Man, it sounds super complicated.
And again, some of that stuff ended up, some of my thought process ended up in that subsector construction guide of how do I build this? What makes sense? So in one way, it was kind of me cleaning up my notes. There's some basic stuff on building aliens, not very sophisticated. It's basically a die 66 and pick your characteristics and whether it's physical or sociological or whatever. At some point, I'm probably going to do something deeper, animals and ecologies, sort of as a running title for it. It won't be like the old supplements where it's just lists of tables, but it'll be more about how to build a planetary ecology that makes sense, and then there'll have to be tables in the back, of course. But the focus would be on making things fit. And with Sky Raiders, the first of the trilogy that's going to be part of this book is set on basically, I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it's a jungle planet, and there was a bunch of creatures already created for it and some tables back in the 80s. And I'm going to kind of try to, without going to the table format, kind of try to expand the 5 or 6 detailed critters into something a little bit more ecosystem like. And then I'll probably take what I learned from that and push that in another year or so to that animals and ecologies book.
So, do you have, aside from your Pioneer projects that you have already like in the hopper, do you have some other like solid production things you have planned coming up, or are you mostly just speculating about stuff that you have in the pipeline down the line?
Pioneer is the only one that's been turned in. Sky Raiders probably ought to have been turned in, but things happen, and so it might be turned in by June and published by the end of the year, maybe. Pioneer we probably won't bring out until next year, as it is. So yeah, that Mars book that I was talking about is probably after Sky Raiders what I have to work on, and then look at the other stuff, the animals and ecologies after that. Um, I kind of want to fix the vehicle handbook too, but that might be a longer term project. I have been unable to do what I did with robots and what others have done with High Guard, and I did with the earlier versions of High Guard is, build a spreadsheet that lets you put it together. Vehicles is a little too messy for that. I couldn't make it work. I couldn't come up with ways to do drop down boxes and selections and things that were internally consistent and didn't look like a giant mess. So I'd like to at least make it internally consistent. That was the big thing I did that I like out of robots is I could build things with clear progressions of what it meant to be basic and advanced and enhanced and all that, and make it kind of fit across the whole spectrum. And vehicles, I think, was done a little bit earlier than that sort of standardization had occurred.
So you'll have to like overhaul it completely, you think?
I would like to. I don't know how much I will be allowed to.
Mm.
You know, this is work for hire. It's somebody else's universe. Uh, I understand that when I'm told no, that it means no. That
Right.
I'm not really going to try to make a. I could publish things on my own, but right now I'm focused on doing stuff for Mongoose, and the limitations are what the limitations are.
Sure.
It's something that the 30-year-old Gear probably wouldn't have liked, but I'm gonna be 60 here by the end of the year, and I've learned to kind of accept that sometimes reality is what it is, and Do you want to do this or not?
Right.
And I do want to do it. So, you know, I think that's part of it, is just an understanding that this is not my universe. There are things that I would do differently. There are things that I don't necessarily like virus, and the Empress Wave, and even the Civil War to a certain extent. But they're coming, probably. Frontier War's coming next week, apparently. So that's kind of cool.
Yeah, I saw that on Facebook.
The art looks good anyway. I don't know. I never liked the way it turned out the first time, because it kind of seemed like it was a cop out. Basically, other than breaking up the sword worlds, it was status quo antebellum, which is kind of eh. And then they broke the entire uh, milieu in what, 10 years after that or 6 years after that, with the Civil War, and they break everything, and suddenly the Aslan are halfway across Spinward Marches, and still scratch my head about that. But
Yeah, there's a lot of lore to keep straight.
yeah, and I don't know how much room we have to work with. Lauren Weisman did his alternate version of reality where the Civil War never happened. That's also boring, though. I'd kind of like the Fifth Frontier War to go a little differently than it did in the '80s, but I don't know. One of the reasons that the sort of the official T5 universe is set like 800 years in the future is so you can kind of
be clear of the
abstract
other
what
stuff,
happened.
and
Yeah, you
yeah,
can say that all of these things may have happened, and yeah, we lost a lot of records in the meantime, and so
here's how it is now.
yeah, so
Right.
so the thing is that either of these things could be true, and either of these two things, or maybe more than two things, evolve into the same end state, which is probably not how multiple realities work. Probably diverges instead of converges, but what do I know? That's all science fiction.
Right. If you had all the resources at your command, what project would you like to take on?
Within the charted space, or
Well, I mean, just like I guess traveler wise, would you like to write a new source book about something, or a series of adventures, or you like mapping so you want to make some more subsectors, or maybe there's a book that you think should always have been written and you would love to be the one to do that.
well, the one that I really wanted to do was the World Builder's Handbook, and so I've done that one. That was
Okay,
my big one that I wanted to do. Um,
so you got your big passion project already done.
I got my big passion project done, which is kind of my reward for being a good little boy, and
Good for
you
you.
know, getting the other stuff done more or less on time. And of course, now I'm starting to fall behind on that. But reality is a terrible thing.
Yeah, schedules never go
The
according to plan, do they?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, and I'll be honest, I'm struggling a little bit with writing adventures. I might not be as good as that. I might be better with rules and structure than I am with adventures, as far as writing them. So the vehicle thing I'd like to fix, but the and I don't know if you much time you spend on the Mongoose forums. I probably spend too much time at least looking at them, but there's definitely a subgroup of people, of which I'm one, who wouldn't mind going all the way down to the detailed construction rules, the fire, fusion, and steel, where you're building stuff from scratch and building it up. Thing maker, I guess they call it in T5. Just kind of not abstracting as much as it has been abstracted with vehicles, and even with robots. I stuck with the same level of abstraction. So locomotion is kind of a thing. It's it's not broken into the components of necessarily of how big is your fuel tank, how does your transmission work, and there's it's abstracted out. Power, and yeah, and fuel, and the capabilities. And armor is abstracted out to a large extent, and there's no facing of armor in robots. There is in vehicles, but yeah, that level of detail is kind of a redo of the. It's a version 3 for Mongoose, right? I don't think there's much appetite for that being done, but I would like to start with the components and build up and build a consistent system. The When I redid the central supply catalog, I made no attempt to make the mercenary weapon building rules work with it, because there was no way that that was going to work. Um, I'm not saying that they're bad rules to build weapons. I'm just saying they're not consistent with what's out there, and it would be very difficult to make them consistent. Plus, it'd be tons of work to do that for every single weapon. So, if you're going to do all that effort, you shouldn't be trying to force it into things that already exist. You should be building all the stuff from components like that. And I had a big disagreement with how lasers were being done, because they're being done wrong.
Because they're wrong.
Well, they are. The fire fusion and steel answer was gravitational focusing, because you're actually going to get a lot better performance from a really wide aperture, and it look more like, a spot. Lasers would look more like spotlights than long than our firearms or cannon. And the way that the receiver was built into mercenary basically didn't focus on that at all. Gauss rifles didn't really. Length of the barrel there, you'd think, would be really important, because you're accelerating along it, and that didn't seem to be the major. Anyway, I just had some disagreements, and I did comment on the book before it was. I put like 200 comments in the one section before it was published, and almost none of them were adopted. So anyway, I'm not saying it's a bad book. I'm just saying that I couldn't. Maybe because I wasn't really happy with it, I didn't even try, honestly, to make the weapons that already existed get retrofitted into something that would work with mercenaries. So there's a disconnect there that I know about. The suits, I think I mentioned earlier, there's no way to design suits as they currently stand. I did change some of the pricing where it just was, in some cases, I think it was just a typo. Because it didn't make any sense. But between the first supply catalog and the new one, but the fact that I couldn't come up with a way to make sense of the way even vac suits worked from a pricing and a weight and a performance standpoint, kind of means that you would need to kind of toss that out and start over. But I don't think that's going to happen.
Gotcha. Well, the central supply catalog is 5-star rating on drive-through, so whatever you did it well.
Yeah, well, that might be
like
also
it was
because the art
well
got
received
better.
there. So congrats on that.
And the thing that I like about the newer stuff from Mongoose is that they have invested in better art. They just look prettier. The books look prettier.
Yeah, they're quality books. They're great.
Yeah, and there's this fine line between collecting and hoarding. I passed that fine line a long time ago, so I have just about everything, including the lovely leather-bound ones for some of these as well. They're worth having. I just need a bigger bookshelf or larger house or
We're
something.
We're gonna need a bigger shelf.
we're gonna have to put on a annex to be a library in my house.
Honey, what are you doing? I'm building a dumbwaiter to haul my books up from downstairs.
Well, and Kickstarter does not help with this. It's not just Traveller that I have a slight problem with. It's anything that looks kind of cool on Kickstarter, and it's like, oh yeah, I got an extra $50. I can click on that, and then this box arrives, and now the contents of the box. There's some Space 1889 after. There's 2 big black books sitting on my floor that I just got that I haven't even looked at yet. That I have no idea where I'm going to put. Yeah, there's a lot of stuff, and I don't know. Maybe I'm just old. I just don't like looking at it so much on even a tablet or certainly not on a computer screen. I'd rather have the book.
Yeah, it's something about having the like I could page exactly to where the rule I'm looking for is in the book. Whereas if it's on a tablet, okay, yeah, you can type in the search and then search. Oh, there it is. But wouldn't you
Or
just by memory know
Ecologies
where that
books.
section is in a
Hmm.
book and can thumb it,
Hmm. Yeah.
immediately? That's so fast.
Hmm. Oh yeah, I bought the new screen too. So I got that. Oh, I moved that anyway. Yeah, I got the new referee screen too, which is kind of cool. Again, they've done well with art, um, but there's just too many books for my room right now. I have this old set of encyclopedias. Maybe I should just toss them in.
The ones that say someday maybe man will set foot on the moon.
Not that bad, but
Okay.
they are from like the mid
They're World
'80s.
Books or Britannica.
They're Britannica.
Oh,
They're it's like probably 30 books plus a manual, so probably 40 books. Yeah, nobody wants those, so no, you can't donate 30, 40-year-old encyclopedias to the library. They
yeah,
don't
maybe
have
used
enough of them either.
bookstore. I have a bunch of old uh, programming guides, like old versions of programming games in Java, like version 1. Like, I'm not sure what to do with all these old books. How to build robots, building lasers, phasers, and ion ray gun projects. Yeah, they're all still on my bookshelf 30 years later, and I haven't opened them in years.
Yeah, I still have college textbooks. I have
Yeah, me
Novell
too.
Netware.
I was like, how could
Novell
they?
Netware. I used to be
I'm
like,
Novell certified too. That's funny.
oh yeah, enterprise certification. I think I passed the most tests in the state of Washington, and the last one of those I probably passed in 1994. Yeah. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
things that no
I
longer
never
matter.
saw a Novell network in real life, like outside the college. Just FYI, it immediately went to Windows 3.11, and then from there it was all Windows.
Oh, I did a lot of stuff with that. It's in the early half of the '90s, and the other half, last half, was all Windows NT and
Mm-hmm.
stuff. Anyway,
All right.
but
So, hey, how can people find you? Do you have are you on the social medias?
I like I said, I'm more
Mostly on the
asymmetrical in my communications. So
mostly on
I'm on
the
that forum.
on the
I do
Mongoose
have a
forum.
web. Yeah, I have a website that hasn't been updated since 2016. Yeah, it's got my two self-published books, but you can still get through Amazon. The problem with writing those books is that the second one is a lot better than the first one. Well, actually, you asked me what I would like to do. Another thing I wanted to do was redo the Fifth Frontier War board game, but again, Mongoose is a publishing company. They're not a wargaming company. They don't really have that much interest in doing a war game. But I would love to redo that. That would be fun.
Awesome, awesome,
I
cool.
think I only played it twice, and Donnie won both times. But yeah.
What would you modernize about it, or how would you?
It it's not the whole subsector. It doesn't cover the Sword Worlds and Darien area at all, really, and it would be useful to go into Vargar territory more. I would just make it be a bigger map, um, and then relook at some of the system defense rules were kind of really abstract. And I haven't really tried to work through the way it would work. I mean, it's all tables and stuff. It would probably make a fairly good, though low graphics computer game, right? You could if you could play it on top of Traveller Map, that would be really cool. But I don't know what that would take. As I said, my programming skills have degenerated to the point where I can use Excel really well and write some scripts and that's it.
I was talking to Joshua, and he said that he built it so that it can be it can be extensible and have plugins and stuff added to it. So who knows?
Yeah, I'm thinking it's possible. I just don't think that I have the skill to do it.
Sure.
Um, I might be able to script what should be written, project manager's level, but as far as actually doing it, no,
Right.
not a chance. Not a chance. Maybe if after I retire, but by that point, the Frontier War will be over again. And
right. Oh, we were going to talk about your other two self-published titles.
Oh, that's where we were going before. So this came out of actually me being bored in the middle of some presentations, but I wanted to look at what would space combat really look like, and that's where I get the fat lasers, for instance, and then so I went and learned a little bit about lasers and a lot about thermodynamics, and kind of based it on a future history that I've been working on and off since probably I was 15. 4,000 years of exactly one professionally published story on. But the two books are called Jupiter Bound and Sunward Bound. They're about commander and crew of a well, I call it a corvette. It's like 20,000 tons, but a crew of 18, you don't. Yeah, it doesn't matter. Anyway, it's a smaller warship, but it's right. It came out. I wrote it before The Expanse, but it does not help that it's a war between Mars and the Belt. That unfortunate timing on that for sure.
Yeah. Oops. Yeah.
Yeah, and I can do the world building and the dialogue and the characters good. I'm a little weak on plot, and I can tell you that the first one would work a lot better if I
wrote the second one first.
No, the second one I think is I mean I'll say it's really good, but so do the people that read it, even though most of them do know me. The problem is I didn't introduce the real antagonist early enough, and so it just doesn't flow well. I would rewrite it by introducing that character in chapter 1, 2, or 3 instead of chapter 9 of 12. The second one benefited from me having. I mean, I've long since done my million words of crap. Probably written about a dozen novel-sized things over the years, but the second one definitely benefited from me spending 4 years on it, throwing away giant chunks and rearranging it. And then I wrote a third one that I don't want to even put up there because the middle third is broken, plot-wise.
Well, hey, sounds like it's your first, your first stab at it. So, you're just practicing and learning as you go. Don't be hard on yourself.
Yeah. Well, the problem is, I designed these things and I kind of made up a combat system to see how it would work. And this battle in the middle, which number one problem, protagonists are not directly involved in. They're more watching than doing. And second problem is that probably metallic hydrogen wasn't really the best idea for fuel because let's just say a lot of ships blow up on both sides. It's like, oops, that was nasty. Reminds me of a thing from the Battle of Jutland where, I forget which admiral it was, but the one with the battle cruisers is like, there seems to be a problem with our battle cruisers today as the third one blows up. Yeah, that sort of thing where it's like, oops, well, that might be how it would really work, but how things really work and how plots need to be designed to make a good story are not necessarily the same thing.
Right.
And that's another one of those things that at 30 I would argue with you and saying that, well, that's dumb, this is the way it is. And at 60 or almost 60, I'm more like, this formula works for a reason. It's worked for several thousand years for a reason. Why don't you just stop trying to fight it?
Stick with it.
Well, and if you're gonna break the rules, break them for specific reasons, not just because you think the rules are stupid.
Right.
And so, yeah, you can still get them off of Amazon, and I think I made $12 last year. First year I made about $200 off of them, but then last year it was 12. So if I do a robot for Mongoose, I generally charge them about $10 a robot. So I can make a lot more in 20 minutes of robot design and cut, paste, write up, and send than I can, than I can by writing a novel, apparently.
Right.
So,
Well, we'll link all that stuff in the description on the video so people can find you and find your stuff. Because
right.
sounds very interesting, and I'm sure lots of folks would be interested in learning more about you and your work.
Yeah, well, I do have another kind of novel in that, well, set like 4,000 years further into the future that I've always meant to write, but I never thought I was ready to. Well, at some point I'm going to start hitting the Alzheimer age, so I better be ready to. So there's notes and some scenes and some things, and maybe in a couple of years it'll be an actual novel out of the thing.
Great. Fantastic. Well, good luck with that. Well, I had a good time, and it was an interesting interview, so thanks for joining us.
All right. Well, yes, thanks for asking me. I appreciate it. When I had published the first stuff, Matt asked me if I wanted to do anything. I said, well, there's no books out yet. I got really nothing to say. But now that there's 5 of them out, one of them sitting in the background, and one of them sitting in my other window on the screen here, only 40 pages into it, then yeah, at least I have something to talk about.
Would you be interested in joining? Should I invite you again next year? Would you join us again next year?
Yeah, and hopefully I have progress at that point on the things that I said I'd have done by now.
Yeah, great. I'm going to hold you accountable. That's a way to hold you accountable.
Yeah, if I come back and say, well, now I'm on page 60 of this thing, then yeah, that's not going to look good, is it?
I'll be looking at my watch, still waiting on that source book.
Yeah, well, we'll see how it goes.
All right, friends and fellow travelers, that's the end of our interview. My guest today has been Geir Lanesskog, writer for Mongoose Traveller, and he's been so kind to join us. And don't miss his various titles over on Mongoose: Spinward Extents, Sector Construction Guide, Robot Handbook, Central Supply Catalog, and the World Builder's Handbook. I will link all of those things and more in the description to this video. So thanks again, Geir.
You're welcome. That was fun.
And until next time, my friends, happy traveling. Don't fly solo through the galaxy. Click like to join our alliance. Subscribe for your crew pass, and enable notifications to never miss an encounter. This journey is fueled by my patrons. Thank you, patrons. Feel the thrill of discovery. Become a patron and join the adventure.